And the hardest thing to do is predict exactly when we're going to come out, but at least it's not getting worse.
Welcome to This Week in Trucking, the podcast that tells you what you need to know about the trucking market for the week in 30 minutes or less. This week, we're talking about diesel prices, freight market trends. We're also talking about the updates to CAS data and some tips for trucking business owners to improve efficiency, as well as the enormous spike in cargo theft. Hey, Gurvir, how's it going?
Doing pretty well. It's May. This year's flying by, and I think at the beginning of every month, I'm always looking at reports to see whether the freight market improved or not. But this is the 5th month of the year. And I think we're halfway through. It's going by pretty quick.
We are indeed. I do have some good news about diesel prices, though. So today's national average diesel price is $3.93.5. Yesterday was the same. It's down slightly from last week, pretty far down from last month, and definitely down from last year as well. The cheapest states to buy diesel in are Oklahoma, Texas, Missouri, South Dakota, and Arkansas this week. So Colorado dropped down. I think they're now 10th cheapest or so. And the 5 states with the highest average diesel prices are the same as always: California, Washington, Pennsylvania, New York, and DC. So this is pretty big news in the diesel market. It came out on Monday. The benchmark diesel price is down for the 5th week in a row. The Department of Energy's Energy Information Administration, their average weekly retail diesel price fell by 4.6 cents on Monday to $3.84.8. And that means it's down 21 cents, more than 21 cents over the last 5 weeks. So this is really good news if you are struggling as an owner-operator or a trucking business owner in general. Any dip in fuel prices is going to be good news.
Totally. And I think one of the figures that I saw, by the way, there's different agencies that show data on the weekly averages. I also saw the number 384. Last week we talked about, hey, can we hit 350s? I think we've had 2 consecutive weeks of pretty big drops. Again, freight market is not improving, and we'll get into that. At least there is some relief from diesel, right? At least the diesel prices are coming down, and that adds to the bottom line. So this is something really good to see. I hope it continues. And I read some projections that the EIA, which is the environmental agency, is projecting that towards the end of the year, we might see an increase. But for the next few weeks, I think we'll hover around these numbers. So that's a good thing.
Yeah, definitely. That Energy Information Administration has a ton of information on this. If you want more information, we'll link it in the description of this episode. One of the things that we talked about or mentioned last week was that as temperatures rise, you have less demand for heating fuels. Heating fuels are similar to diesel. And so when you have less demand for a product, the price goes down pretty naturally. But something else that I thought was interesting that I think FreightWaves was reporting on is that part of the reason that fuel prices may be coming down is the renewable diesel market, that environmental regulations have prompted refiners to convert crude oil processing facilities to produce renewable diesel. And so higher use of renewable diesel cuts down on demand for regular diesel and thus lower prices, right? And actually another study just came out about renewable diesel catalyst for decarbonization by the American Transportation Research Institute. Super interesting. I'm still getting through it, so haven't gotten through all of it yet, but we'll definitely report on that, any interesting findings there for the next couple of weeks.
I think one of the things that we talked about last episode, I think 2 weeks ago, was the renewable diesel versus electrification of trucks. And I think the renewable diesel, the advantages look pretty promising in terms of pricing, cost, and also less emissions. So let's see how that goes. But yeah, I do see a trend in the future more towards renewable diesel than electrification.
Definitely. And just in what I've read so far, the production of renewable diesel has increased incredibly in the last 2 years, which is not really something that I've heard about a whole lot. You hear a lot about electrification and not so much about renewable diesel production. So I'm interested to know what are the different setbacks and environmental impacts of renewable diesel as compared to electric trucks. Really interested in learning about this more. So stay tuned if you're interested in that. as well. And FreightWaves is coming out with a lot of really cool information about this. They have a whole newsletter about trucking tech, which is a really great resource for information on trends in trucking technology.
Yep. Should we get into the freight market?
Let's do it.
Awesome. Don't really have good news here. The spot market is still soft and continues to pose some challenges for small carriers. Produce season got kicked off. We saw some rate hikes in Florida. We're seeing some rate hikes in California, but the spot market is still pretty tough. So what are some things that have changed from last week? So spot load posts. So load posts have gone down by nearly 1%, but the truck posts have gone up by 4%. So those things are heading in the wrong direction. And if you look at the national spot rates, dry van rates were still hovering around $1.99 a mile, same as April. Not much of a change from April. Flatbed has gone up by 1 cent. So in April, we were at $2.52 per mile. In May, we are at $2.53. So not significant changes there. Reefer, obviously, because of the produce season, has seen the biggest jump. So we're about 4 cents higher, but not significantly higher either. February, reefer was $2.42. So we're still lower than February rates, even when the produce season is kicking off. There is a small increase, but relatively, it's not much. Yeah, the soft market is still here, and it's not nearly going away as fast as we would thought. I think, again, January was a pump fake, and we thought the January market is about to turn. But now it's been February, March, April. We're still in May, and we're still not seeing that market is turning. So that's not really a good news. I know we're getting closer and closer, and the hardest thing to do is predict exactly when we're going to come out. But at least it's not getting worse. That is some positive news.
Yeah. Yeah, those rates are rough. And just a 4% increase for reefers from April to May, that's surprising, right? That's barely, what, and a half? That's nothing. And we're seeing a lot more produce coming out. So what can you tell us about other indicators that might explain why rates aren't going up?
Certain areas you're going to see higher than a 1.5% or 4 cents, for example, California, Florida. But these are just to make sure these are averages across the U.S., right? So in certain areas, the reefer rates are going down. So yeah, you could experience higher rate jumps in like Florida, wherever produce season is kicking off. But I think also just looking at the national average tells us a lot, right? Are the overall rates moving up, or are these just seasonally adjusted rates? So yeah, I don't think the produce season is having an impact that I personally thought we would. And the market is just really not shifting at this point. And that makes me get into my next story. The story that I want to share today is that one of the key points that we look at is the CAS data. It's a CAS index. CAS is a company that sort of processes invoices. I think they do about $38 billion a year. So they're going to have significant amount of data on invoices. They publish an index every month to tell us whether the rates are moving up or down. So the CAS freight index came out for April. Again, May, it's going to come out in June. But April showed that there was a 1.6% decrease in shipments and about a 4% year-over-year decline. So from March to April, there was actually a 1.6% decrease. Right? Not a significant decrease, but just means that the market is really not turning. The severe winter storms and the Baltimore Bridge collapse reduced freight demand in April as well. Private fleets are also competing for backhauls and on spot market. That also leaves less freight out for owner operators. So your private fleets that usually haul their own goods, a lot of the times they actually do backhauls off of the spot market, right? Why come back empty when you're delivering your own goods? Might as well just cover up for fuel. And that can also drive down rates because they're not really running their fleet to make a profit. They're just running their fleets to deliver goods and their own goods. So that has an impact on the spot market and the expenditure, which is how much is the total spend in freight. That has gone down about 16.8% from last year, which makes sense. You can probably see like the rates are down about 16 to 20%, which means the annual spend on freight has gone down about 20%. CAS is saying about 16.8. Overall, not a huge positive signs. And then lastly, Schneider said that this is some positive news, that they had some positive contract rate renewals. Again, this is not an indication that the market is turning, but it's an indication that it's not getting worse, right? So Schneider, when renewing their contract rates with some of the shippers, did not experience a huge negative decrease in rates. I think the rates are steady, and that sort of gave them a positive outlook. So yeah, I think that in summary, things are not improving right now. They're just hovering around 1 to 2% decline, 1% uptick here and there, but overall, we're just staying stable.
What you said about private fleets was really interesting. I remember an article maybe about a year ago or 2 years ago that was talking about the enormous increase that a lot of shippers were investing in their private fleets. And mainly because they saw a lot of disruption in their supply chains during the pandemic. And to correct for that, they started investing in their own private fleets because they were having to pay really high rates on the freight market to get their goods shipped back and forth. And so they started investing a lot. And now you're seeing the result of that investment because those investments take time, right? It takes time to build out teams, buy trucks, and hire people and move your freight yourself. And so potentially that's something that now the freight market is competing with that they weren't a couple of years ago.
And trucking companies solve the inconsistency problem. And what I mean by that is that if you're a shipper and you know that you have certain consistent freight, I think it's actually beneficial to run your own private. The more consistency there is in freight and lanes, the cheaper it becomes to move goods. You just can't have too many spikes. And I think what certain shippers and manufacturers and these companies have done is they have their own private fleet to handle some of the freight, let's say 30, 40% of the freight. And then the rest 60, 50% or 40, whatever their comfortable percentages, they outsource it. And they're able to just really bring down the cost down, right? Because what shippers want is stability and want to make sure that they have consistency over price, right? And the freight market changes within a few months. Like literally from 7, 8 months from today, we could be looking at a 20% increase in spot rates. It's unlikely right now, given what we're seeing. But what I'm saying is that sometimes those things do happen in the spot market. So I think it's a good way for shippers to hedge against their supply chain costs.
Right. So you manage the freight that you know is going to need to be moved every week, every month, every year. The predictable stuff you handle with your own fleet. It's the unpredictable stuff that gets put on.
Yeah, exactly. If I'm a shipper and I know there's 10 loads to New York every week, I might just create a small team of dispatchers and just create a small trucking fleet within the company to run our own freight. It serves a lot of benefits than just hedging on cost.
That brings me to the article that I wanted to share. This one was from Overdrive Online, that in a tough trucking business environment, owner-operators need to improve their efficiency. And this author gave a bunch of different efficiency tips for owner-operators. One was to increase the quality of revenue that you get for your business, and instead of trying to increase just the quantity of miles. When there's a really good market and rates are really high, you can increase the miles that you're running and really just make a ton of money. But in a down market, you can't just think about miles. You have to think about the quality of your revenue. And to increase operational and fuel efficiency. So he linked to a bunch of different resources in that article. So definitely go check that article out. But about fuel efficiency, making sure you have proper truck specs on your engine, transmission, aerodynamics, tires, and that you maintain those optimal specs with preventive maintenance and annual maintenance controls. A lot has to do with driver behavior too, mostly in controlling speed. So he recommends that you only drive just as fast as you absolutely need to, and that staying at 60, 55 miles an hour is going to really get you the best fuel economy. So if you don't have to drive any faster than that, then you shouldn't. And that you should try to calculate, and they linked to a calculator there that I will check out. They suggest that you calculate the amount of time that it's going to take you and the mileage that it's going to take you to get from your pickup to your destination, and calculate that mile per hour that you would need to drive to get from point A to point B, and consider all of the stops you're going to need to take and all of the time that it takes loading your truck and getting unloaded. Because if you have that, then you know that if you're that number is already at 60 miles an hour, you know that you're actually going to need to drive a lot faster to make that in time. So that's something interesting to consider when you're looking at what loads to book. It's not just about the rate, it's also how much is it going to cost you to actually haul that load.
Totally. I love the article because I think we can't really do anything about the economy. The economy is going to act the way it is given the market, but there's a lot of things that are in our control. A 5 cent difference on 10,000 miles a month is $500. That absolutely goes to your bottom line. And I think what I want to show with that is that any savings that you get by doing group purchasing, you're in Virginia, and you notice that it's a 5 cent cheaper. I've seen some people have an extra tank on the truck so they can fill up at the cheapest gas station. But taking gas into consideration, diesel into consideration when booking loads, doing local versus longer loads, but just really holistically knowing the business, and each few cents per mile makes a huge difference, right? Literally by saving 5 cents extra per gallon, you can make extra $500 a month. So definitely, I think driving is huge. I remember we tried to govern our trucks at 60 and the drivers had a big pushback. But if you're an owner operator, definitely drive at like 60. Do not exceed 60. So you're getting the best mile per gallon. I've also heard things like TA Petro has a better fuel per gallon. Like the average that you get per mile is better with TA Petro. Again, those are just details and just knowing your business really well, right? And this is what I've heard from other owner operators and even doing some experimentations on with our trucks that, hey, do certain truck stops give us a different miles per gallon. And you can do that test like really quickly. Just fuel at a TA Petro and see what kind of mile per gallon average you're getting. But again, I think the notion that I want to tell is like really knowing your business in and out and really knowing your numbers and then just coming up with a strategy. I remember I was talking to one of my uncles when he got into trucking. I told him, hey, just assume you're going to always make $8,000 a month after all expenses, even though he was making 16K during like 2021. And I think the notion was that you want to reverse engineer these things, right? Hey, what is the minimum amount that you need? Like I know some drivers right now that only need $4,000 a month to survive, and they're not driving as much because they don't have a burden to always be on the road. But I also know some owner operators that need to bring $10,000 at home to pay for your mortgages and the houses and the cars and everything. And I don't want to get into that discussion of, being financially disciplined, but I think it's all reverse engineering. Just make sure that your costs are really low. And then you get a lot of flexibility, right? You can only drive 3 to 4 days a week and not kill your truck, right? When the rates are really low. Like I have some owner operators that are saying, look, I'm not going to drive much this year, right? I'm just going to do barely minimum and I'm not going to put the miles on my truck and devalue my truck. I'd rather just drive when the rates improve. But there's a lot of things that are in our control that we can do. And I think this article shares a lot of those.
Yeah, so definitely go check that out. Another one of his recommendations is to try out power only because that can minimize the amount of time that you spend loading and unloading. So that was an interesting tip. I know we talked about that last episode. Someone had a question about power only loads and how to get power only loads. And so it's an interesting discussion there. I'm interested to see who has experience in power only and whether or not that's a good thing to get into when rates are really low.
Yeah, I'm personally not a big fan of power only, but there's always loads available on Amazon and other things. I think you can do a hybrid where you do have your own drive-in trailer and you can find power only loads if you're loaded, like getting creative like that. Another idea I would share is, look, if you have a partial load, you're hauling a drive-in or it's easier on the drive-in, find another load that you can put in there partial. Like you're going from here to Florida, maybe there's a load from Richmond to Georgia that you can make an extra 600, $700 as long as the shipper and the broker allows it, right? Some of these loads are sealed. But you can get really creative with these things. You're putting 2 loads and you're going one way and you're doubling the amount of revenue. But similarly, I think you can work with power only creatively. Hey, you have a load on your trailer. Let me just find some quick power only load for Amazon or someone else that I can quickly do while my trailer is loaded and I can use that. So I think there's definitely some ways to creatively do those things.
For sure. The last story that I wanted to draw attention to was the wave of cargo thefts. So Verisk CargoNet said it documented almost 1,000 incidents of cargo theft in the first quarter of this year. That's a 46% increase compared to Q1 of last year and a 10% increase from Q4 of 2023. The average stolen shipment value was more than $280,000. And there was an estimated $154 million worth of goods that were stolen in the first quarter of this year. So this is something that has been increasing, an increasing trend over the last year or so. And Gurvir, I'm wondering if you have heard about this anecdotally from any of your friends and relatives. What's their experience with cargo theft?
Yeah, no, I saw a post from a friend. He was part of a big brokerage at Access America and Coyote, and he had a really interesting post on LinkedIn about these new types of fraud. I think last year we saw a lot of double brokering fraud, and the industry has cracked down on it. And the fraudster is just getting creative, right? So the fraud that we saw like last year was where the fraudster would just steal an identity of a trucker and get a load from a broker, and then they would just give it to another trucking company pretending to be another broker, right? So they would steal identities twice. First as a trucker to get a load, and then they would pretend to be a broker and then give that load off. And they would run these schemes for months to 2 months where they were actually not tampering with the product, right? They were simply just trying to get paid from this customer and this broker and never pay the guy that delivered the load. So that happened a lot last year with tools like Highway, and a lot of our carriers and a lot of people out there may be experiencing this. When they try to call and book a load, a lot of brokers are denying them because they're seeing like no inspection history or certain things that they're tracking, right? So you might be experiencing this where certain brokers are saying, hey, look, I can't load you. And they don't reveal the reason. And that's because they're looking at certain flags. But that was what was happening last year. I think this year they're getting more creative where, again, I was trying to look it up and how these schemes work. But essentially it's product theft. Somehow they're able to find out and they're able to book a load, right? I think pretending to be a trucking company, they get the rate confirmation, the pickup number and everything, and they go on to the shipper, they pick up the load, and then you don't hear about them, right? And the trucking company that they're showing on the rate card on all these things was not the trucking company. So now the product is going missing, right? And they're able to resell that product elsewhere. And some of these loads are really, expensive. I remember when there was a load of Viagra that got lost. It was worth millions, right? So even though the cargo insurance is only 100,000, you can imagine some of these things are pretty interesting, like electronics or Macs or sneakers or who knows what. But yeah, I've been hearing a lot about cargo theft.
Yeah,
Recently.
big spikes have happened in mainly California, Illinois, and Texas. And you're absolutely right that most of these cases came in the form of pretty complex fraud schemes where the entire truckload was picked up and never delivered, or delivered with different paperwork to hide the theft from the customer.
Yeah.
There still is a lot of the more simple cargo theft happening, which is the whole or partial theft of an unintended loaded trailer. But most of these cases were those fraud schemes that you just described. And the most popular cargo for that theft is small appliances, liquor, energy drinks, and copper. So those are really heavily targeted. And the biggest hotspots for theft are Southern California, Dallas, Fort Worth, Atlanta, as well as the corridor spanning New York, New Jersey, and Eastern Pennsylvania. This is a huge and not only a warning to carriers out there who are hauling some of this really popular freight to steal, but also a warning to carriers that you really need to show your legitimacy when you're out there trying to book loads now. There's a higher bar that brokers are going to look for and shippers are going to look for. They really want to see that you are a legitimate business, that you have all of your paperwork, that you've had an inspection, that have all your ducks in a row, so to speak. So just really important to try and legitimize your business as early as humanly possible and demonstrate that legitimacy.
Yeah. There's another, I just found a post, and I'm not going to share how this fraud occurs. I don't want to give anybody ideas, but maybe we'll discuss it on some future podcasts. But I would say that definitely make sure that you're getting, because this, sorry, what I was going to say was that it's actually a good thing. This might be controversial. It's a good thing that everybody's experiencing fraud, because I think that forces the industry to come up with solutions. Last year, it was just carriers and factoring companies going through a lot of fraud. And when you're a single entity in an industry, other players really don't care. So the good thing is it's good that everybody's experiencing this, the brokers, the shippers, that the fraud has transitioned into other players, because I think it's going to allow everybody to be, let's wake up and figure this thing out. And we've seen a lot of new tools come up since last year that will help resolve these issues. But to your point, if you're a new carrier, make sure you get an inspection. Make sure you really make sure that you legitimize your business, because otherwise a lot of brokers are going to deny freight to you, even though you're a legitimate carrier. So definitely do those things. Definitely get an inspection. And you can do a voluntary inspection at any scale house.
Yeah, definitely. All right, let's get into some of these questions. We might only have time for one. So I wanted to go over this comment that I saw from someone on one of the Facebook groups that we follow. This person says, don't have much experience in loans. I only had one auto loan back in 2016. I have a 2-year credit history and a 714 score when I went to the credit union and got approved. Now I'm going to buy a used truck under $60,000. My credit score is 800 clean for 8 years. And I have 3 years of OTR experience. I know rates aren't the same at all, but I'm seeking some good advice. And yes, I know the market conditions. I just want to know if there are any good banks or companies that does financing for trucks with great rates. I did a little research, and I'm seeing even with an excellent credit score, I'm going to need to come up with 15 to 20% down, and the interest is going to be 8 to 12%. I just don't know if I want to walk into a dealership and have the financing brokers rip me off with high rates. So what would you say to someone who has a great credit score? 800 is an awesome credit score, but you're not going to get better than that. You're not going to get better. You're only going to get the best rates, but they're still seeing 8 to 12% on rates, which seems high to this person. So what would you say? What have you seen in the market for buying used trucks lately?
Yeah. So first thing, I would recommend that talk to BMO Bank. They're one of the largest, I think they're probably the largest lender in the trucking space, and this particularly catered to people with high credit scores, right? And you're probably going to get a really good deal. I'm not saying the cheapest deal. You're probably going to be around the right ballpark with BMO Finance. Another bank that I would recommend is First National Bank. So I would say go towards banks, not really those private lenders. That's where you're going to see interest rates over 10%, 10 to 14%. So banks is where I think you'll still see 7 to 10%, depending on the down payment that you give. Another side note, by the way, when banks were giving 0% truck loans, that is a disaster, because you're also creating more and more MCs and more owner operators. So this is actually a good thing. The stringent the requirements to get a loan, that means you have less people entering. That means the rates are going to be good for people that are in the industry, right? So one of the things that has happened over time is whenever banks and private lenders have advertised 0% trucks, it always leads to more and more people getting trucks, right? Which means there's more trucks out there than demand. Just a side note, that has always been a problem. So the stringent requirements does mean that less people will come into the market. Could you imagine like a 3% loan right now, 4% on a truck? You would see like maybe the double amount of people coming into the industry and becoming owner operators. But yeah, I would speak to BMO. You can just Google BMO Bank. They're based in Canada, but they also have a division in the US. So they're one of the largest lenders. And First National Bank, they're based in Pennsylvania. I think banks are usually the cheapest.
Yeah, definitely. And check out your local credit union as well if you already have a good reputation with them and a relationship with them, and you've gotten business loans from them before. Usually a local lender is going to be a good option as well, but those banks are a good option. Two other things that I wanted to mention. One is that I saw a lot of comments on this post of, why are you buying a truck now? Rates are so bad. You shouldn't do this. This is a bad idea. I say if you're making this your career and you really want to start a business, don't let other people discourage you from doing that. If you are looking at this as a long-term way to build wealth personally, I think that it can be a good move even in a down market, especially because when there is a down market, you can buy. And so if you can buy cheap trucks and you can pay them off sooner and you can stay on the road longer.
100%. 100%. This is the best time to get into the industry because trucks are so much cheaper. My dad the other day found a truck, Kenworth T680, 500,000 miles for $35,000. Could you imagine buying a truck $35,000 compared to the COVID 100,000? Even you're getting paid more, and now your buying price and your 3-year expenses are going to be so low. Right?
If you can make the numbers now,
yeah,
then you're good. You're golden. I'm not saying that everyone should do it. You shouldn't do it if you don't know what you're doing, if you're not doing your numbers, if you can't make a business case for it, then no, of course, don't start a trucking company. But that's true in any market, right?
Yeah.
And second thing is that this person is so smart to be shopping around for financing instead of being hyper focused on buying that truck, going to the dealership, knowing where you want to buy it, know what kind of truck you want, and getting there and all of a sudden they ask you, how are you going to finance it? And you don't know, what to say. And so
100%.
they give you some broker who's going to charge you
Yeah,
insane interest rates.
it's crazy. Caroline, I knew people that were not even paying attention to the interest rate. They were like, the rates are so good. Who cares if I'm paying 14%? This is an awesome thing. This person's doing their research. They want to know if they're getting the best price on their loans and what's the right APR to pay. That means someone's actually doing their research before coming into the industry, right? And the people that did not look at those sheets and loan terms, I know some of them that are screwed right now, right?
Right.
So no, this is really good. By the way, if your overhead is really low, you have a lot of flexibility. Things don't work out, get out. You can probably sell the $35,000 truck for $35,000 even after 6 months, right? So you don't have much losses. So
Right.
low overhead means you have a lot of flexibility. Even if things don't work out, you will literally minimize your losses, right? No, I think that this is a great time to get into the business if you can.
Cool. All right, so that's it for today. Thanks for joining us for This Week in Trucking, and we'll see you next time.
Awesome.